I woke to the sound of footsteps directly above my head. Slow, deliberate, and heavy, like someone walking barefoot across creaking wood. For a second, in the darkness of my bedroom, I wasn't sure if I'd actually heard it or if it was just the old house settling. But then it came again, 3 sharp creaks, a pause, and then 2 more. Someone was in my attic. My first thought was irrational. This house had been empty for 50 years before I bought it last month. It had sat rotting at the edge of town, boarded up and sagging under decades of neglect. The realtor had called it a hidden gem. My friends had called it a death trap. But I loved old houses, loved the idea of restoring them, of breathing life back into forgotten spaces. I'd moved in alone 2 weeks ago, surrounded by peeling wallpaper, cold air, and the smell of old plaster. Nothing about it had ever felt threatening, until now. The footsteps above me stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than the sound itself. The air in my room felt different, thicker somehow, and I could hear my own breathing echo faintly in the stillness. My phone sat on the nightstand. I grabbed it, flicked on the flashlight, and pointed it at the ceiling as if that would help. The attic hatch was in the hallway outside my bedroom. A square panel with a cord that dangled like a limp rope. I'd never even opened it. In fact, I'd planned to leave the attic for last. The realtor had told me the place hadn't been inspected up there in decades, that the beams might be unstable. Probably just raccoons, I whispered to myself. But the sound had been too slow, too deliberate for an animal. I lay there for a full minute, trying to convince myself I hadn't heard anything. The old house was full of noises, pipes clanking, walls popping as they cooled at night. But I'd spent 2 weeks listening to its quirks, and this wasn't one of them. My heart thudded. Another creak echoed above me, closer to the center of the attic. That was enough. I swung my legs out of bed, the wooden floor icy against my bare feet, and grabbed the heavy flashlight I kept near the door. The hallway was dim, only a sliver of moonlight leaking through the window at the far end. The cord to the attic hatch swayed slightly, even though there was no breeze. I reached up, hesitated, and then gave it a sharp pull. The hatch opened with a soft groan, dust spilling down in a fine mist. A rickety wooden ladder slid down until its feet touched the floor. The smell of the attic drifted out, dry wood, mold, and something faintly metallic, like rust or blood. "Hello." My voice came out smaller than I intended. "Is anyone up there?" No answer. I pointed the flashlight beam into the opening. The light cut through dust motes, illuminating jagged wooden beams and old insulation. The space beyond was mostly shadows. I should have called the police. That's what any normal person would do. But something about the footsteps felt different, like they weren't meant to be heard, like they belonged to someone who didn't want to be seen. And yet I couldn't shake the sense that if I didn't look now, I'd regret it forever. Hand trembling, I started climbing the ladder. Each rung creaked under my weight. The air grew colder as I neared the top, a chill that didn't belong in a summer night. I poked my head through the opening and swept the flashlight around. The attic was bigger than I'd expected, stretching the entire length of the house. Slanted beams formed a jagged triangle above me, and the floor was covered in a thin layer of dust. Old furniture was scattered about, broken chairs, a trunk, a cracked mirror leaning against the far wall. My beam of light slid over everything, making long, warped shadows dance across the rafters. No one. I climbed all the way up, my heart pounding. The smell up here was stronger now, like damp metal and something faintly sweet, almost like rotting fruit. The boards under my feet groaned as I moved forward. "Hello," I said again, louder this time. Still nothing. I crouched and pressed my hand to the floor. The dust here was disturbed, not by animals, but by footprints, bare human footprints, faint but unmistakable. They started near the attic window, trailed across the floor, and stopped a few feet from where I stood. I felt my stomach drop. The footprints weren't mine. I backed up a step, the beam of my flashlight shaking. The silence around me was so deep it rang in my ears. Then, somewhere in the shadows behind the old trunk, came the faintest sound, a slow inhale, like someone trying not to breathe too loud. I swung the flashlight toward it. Nothing. But I'd heard it. I knew I had. I started moving toward the ladder, my pulse hammering, but something caught my eye. Against the far wall, beneath the slant of the roof, was a door I hadn't noticed before. Not a real door, more like a panel, old and narrow, just big enough for a person to slip through. The paint was peeling, and there were scratches around the handle, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. The footprints led straight to it. I stood frozen, the cold air brushing against my face. The panel was shut tight, but as I stared at it, I thought I saw it shift, a slight, almost imperceptible bulge, like something pressing from the other side. Then, very softly, I heard a whisper. It wasn't words exactly, more like a breath dragged across the edge of speech. My flashlight flickered once, twice, then steadied. I stumbled back toward the ladder, trying to keep my eyes on the panel, but a beam of light from the attic window caught the mirror leaning against the wall. In the glass, for just a second, I saw something move. It was standing behind me. I spun around, the flashlight beam jerking wildly across the attic. Dust swirled. Shadows leapt. Nothing there. But in the mirror, the movement had been real. A shape, tall and thin, standing too close, its face a blur of pale skin. My breath came fast now. The cold air felt like ice in my lungs. I backed toward the ladder, trying not to make noise, but the boards creaked with every step. Then, from behind the panel, came a sound that made my blood go cold. Knocking. 3 slow knocks. Pause. Then 2 more. Exactly like the footsteps I'd heard before. I gripped the ladder with both hands, the flashlight clattering against the wood. The knocking stopped. The attic was silent again. And then, from somewhere below me, in the hallway, directly beneath the open hatch, came a voice. It whispered my name. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it. My name, spoken in the dark, soft as a sigh, floating up through the hatch. But the way my stomach clenched told me I hadn't. I froze on the ladder, one foot still on the attic floor, the other hovering over the first rung. Hello. I called out, my voice breaking. Silence. The beam of my flashlight trembled as I aimed it down into the hallway. The floor below was empty, pale with moonlight. But I couldn't shake the sensation that something stood just out of sight, pressed flat against the wall beneath me. I didn't go down. I couldn't. Instead, I climbed back into the attic, pulling the ladder up behind me until it folded into the hatch with a hollow snap. The thought of descending into that darkness, toward a voice that knew my name, was too much. The attic suddenly felt safer, even though my skin crawled with every breath I took. I pressed my back to one of the beams and tried to steady my breathing. The dust tasted bitter on my tongue. Somewhere nearby, I thought I heard a faint scuttling sound, like something dragging across wood. I kept the flashlight aimed at the panel door on the far wall. The footprints still led to it, still stopped just short, as if whoever made them had stood there, waiting. The scratches around the handle caught the light. Deep gouges in the wood, jagged and frantic. I don't know how long I sat there, staring. Minutes? An hour? My phone was in my pocket, but the thought of looking down, of tearing my eyes away from that door, made me sick with dread. If I looked away, I was sure it would open. But then, the house spoke again. Not footsteps this time. Not a whisper. A groan, deep and low, rising through the beams beneath me. Like the wood itself was alive, straining under something heavy. I pressed my hand to the floor, and the vibration traveled up through my palm. Someone, or something, was moving below me. I shut off the flashlight. It felt stupid, but the beam made me feel exposed, like whatever was down there could track me by the light. Darkness swallowed the attic whole. My eyes adjusted slowly, shapes surfacing in shades of gray. The trunk, the broken chair, the outline of the panel door. The house groaned again. Closer now. I pressed my forehead against the beam and tried not to breathe too loud. Every sound seemed amplified. The faint thud of my heart, the catch of my throat as I swallowed. Then, faint but clear, came the sound of steps on the hallway floor. Heavy, measured, matching the rhythm I'd heard above my room. They stopped directly beneath the hatch. The silence that followed was unbearable. I clenched my fists to keep them from shaking. Then tap. Something pressed against the closed hatch from below. A single push, just enough to make the panel quiver. Dust fell around me like ash. I bit down on my lip so hard I tasted blood. A second push. Harder this time. The wood groaned. And then, nothing. The pressure vanished, leaving me in silence so deep it rang in my ears. I waited. 10 seconds. 30. A full minute. Still nothing. Finally, I dared to switch the flashlight back on, its beam cutting through the dark like a blade. The hatch was still closed. The ladder still folded. Nothing had moved. But I couldn't shake the certainty that whatever was down there hadn't gone away. It was waiting. I forced myself to stand. My legs trembled so badly I nearly fell, but I kept moving, step by step, toward the far wall, toward the panel door. Every part of me screamed not to. But if I was trapped up here, I needed to know what I was dealing with. And deep down, I had this awful suspicion that the thing in the hallway and the thing behind that panel weren't separate. They were the same. Up close, the panel was worse than I'd thought. The scratches weren't just around the handle. They were scattered across the wood itself, some of them deep enough to splinter the surface. The paint around the edges was worn down to raw wood, as though the door had been opened and closed countless times. I reached out and touched the handle. Cold. Too cold. For a moment, I thought I heard something inside. A faint rustling, like fabric brushing against wood. I leaned closer, holding my breath. That's when the mirror caught me again. The cracked mirror leaning against the wall reflected me in fragments. My face, my flashlight, the panel door, but in the reflection, the panel was open. And something stood in the gap. I staggered back, slamming into a beam. The flashlight beam jerked, scattering across the rafters. In the mirror, the door remained open, a dark slit yawning across the wall. The figure inside was too tall, its shoulders bent awkwardly against the low roof. Its head tilted, as if it were listening. But when I turned to look at the real panel, still closed. Shut tight, unmoving. The reflection was lying to me. Or maybe it wasn't. I squeezed my eyes shut, then forced them open again. The mirror hadn't changed. The figure was still there, half hidden in the shadow of the false door, its blurred face turned toward me. Then, in the real attic, I heard it. A slow, deliberate creak, as if the panel had shifted slightly on its hinges. I ran. I didn't care what was waiting below. I dragged the hatch cord, yanked the ladder down, and half slid, half fell into the hallway. My flashlight beam swung wildly, catching only empty walls and peeling wallpaper. No one there. I bolted into my bedroom and slammed the door, shoving a chair under the handle. My heart hammered so loud I could barely hear anything else. But in the silence that followed, one sound still cut through. From above me, faint but steady, came the footsteps again. Only this time, they weren't pacing. They were running. The sound of running footsteps in the attic above me froze every muscle in my body. They pounded across the length of the house, sharp and frantic, like someone sprinting barefoot over the wooden boards. Dust sifted down from the ceiling with each impact. I pressed my back against the wall, clutching the flashlight like a weapon. The chair braced against my door rattled faintly, though nothing pushed against it. My mouth was so dry I couldn't swallow. The footsteps stopped as suddenly as they began. Silence swallowed the house, heavy and absolute. I strained to listen, every nerve on fire. Then, one final creak. Directly above me, something was standing right over my bed. I dared a glance upward. The ceiling stretched pale and still in the beam of my flashlight, nothing out of place. But the pressure of that presence pressed down on me all the same, heavy enough to make my chest ache. I whispered to myself, "It's just the house. Just the house." But I didn't believe it. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands. 3:14 a.m. My thumb hovered over the keypad to call 911, but I stopped. What would I even say? That footsteps had been chasing me in an attic no one had entered in 50 years? That a mirror was showing me things that weren't there? They'd think I was crazy. Besides, I wasn't sure what I was dealing with could be stopped by police. I sat there for what felt like hours, the flashlight trained on the door, waiting for it to rattle, for the chair to slide, for something, anything, to happen. But the house remained unnervingly still. Eventually, exhaustion pressed down heavier than fear. My body shook with adrenaline, but my eyes burned with fatigue. Against every instinct, I lay back on the bed, the flashlight still clutched in my hand, its beam aimed at the ceiling. That's when I noticed it. The beam of light wasn't steady. It shimmered slightly, like it was shining through heat waves. At first, I thought the batteries were dying. But when I tilted it to the side, the shimmer stayed in the same spot, directly above my bed. I sat up fast. The air there seemed different, almost distorted, like looking at water through glass. I slowly raised my hand toward it. My fingers tingled as they entered the warped air, the sensation like static electricity crawling across my skin. Then I heard the whisper again. My name. This time it wasn't from the hallway or the attic. It was right there, above me, inside the shimmer. The sound slid into my ear, cold and intimate, like someone's lips pressed against them. I yanked my hand back and stumbled out of bed, knocking the flashlight against the floor. Its beam rolled across the room, slicing shadows into long, warped shapes. The shimmer pulsed once, faintly, like a ripple across water. And then it was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the corner of the room with my knees pulled up, flashlight on, staring at the ceiling until the first pale light of dawn bled through the curtains. When the sun finally rose, the house felt different, less oppressive, as if whatever lingered here didn't like the daylight. I told myself it was just exhaustion, my mind fraying from lack of sleep. But when I glanced at the ceiling again, I could still see faint marks where the shimmer had been, tiny handprints smeared into the plaster, as if something inside had pressed against it. I left the house that morning, drove into town, sat in a diner for hours nursing coffee I didn't taste. I told myself I'd sell the place, cut my losses, move out before night came again. But when I pulled up the real estate listing on my phone, something strange stopped me. The description had changed. It used to say, unoccupied for over 50 years. Needs renovation. Now it read, recently inhabited. Attic inaccessible. I stared at it for a long time, my stomach twisting. I hadn't touched the listing. I doubted the realtor had either. But there it was, staring back at me like a taunt. By the time I drove back to the house, the sun was sinking behind the trees. The shadows stretched long across the yard, the old wooden siding glowing faintly orange in the last light. Every instinct told me not to go inside. But I had to know. The moment I opened the door, the smell hit me. That same metallic tang from the attic, stronger now, drifting through the entire house. Like rust and mold and something sour underneath. I stepped inside cautiously, flashlight already in hand. The floor creaked under my weight, though softer than the footsteps I'd heard the night before. The house felt expectant. I checked every room on the first floor. Empty. Same with the kitchen, where cabinets sagged and dust coated every surface. I climbed the stairs slowly, the beam shaking over the faded wallpaper, past cracked picture frames whose glass had long since fogged. When I reached the hallway outside my bedroom, I stopped. The attic hatch cord was hanging lower than before, swaying slightly in the still air. I hadn't left it that way. The smell was strongest here, seeping down through the hatch like smoke. I tilted the flashlight upward, the light cutting into the black square of the attic opening. Dust drifted lazily down, catching in the beam. Then, faintly, something moved. A shadow crossing just beyond the hatch. I froze, breath caught in my throat. The shadow paused. And then, slowly, deliberately, a hand gripped the edge of the hatch and pulled. Not the ladder, just the hatch itself. It lowered inch by inch, creaking loudly in the silence. Dust rained down in thick clouds. I staggered back, flashlight beam trembling as the square opening widened. My mind screamed to run, to get out of the house, but my body refused to obey. When the hatch opened fully, the ladder didn't fall. Instead, the blackness above seemed to deepen, as if the attic were no longer a room but a void. The smell of metal and rot poured out stronger than ever. And then, out of that blackness, something leaned down. A face. Pale. Blurred. Features indistinct, shifting like water. Its eyes, if they were eyes, were nothing but pits of shadow. It whispered my name again, but this time not soft, not subtle. It hissed it, long and drawn out, filling the hallway until the wallpaper seemed to peel with the sound. I dropped the flashlight. The beam rolled across the floor, landing just in time to illuminate a trail of bare, dusty footprints appearing one by one down the hall. They were walking toward me. The footprints came toward me, one by one, pressing into the dusty hallway floor as though an invisible body were stepping there. They were wet-looking, darker than the surrounding wood, each print perfectly clear, arched, barefoot, human. I couldn't move. My back hit the wall as the prints drew closer, stopping just out of reach. The thing leaning from the attic hatch didn't climb down. It simply watched, its blurred face rippling like it was submerged in water. Then it began to speak. Not a whisper this time. Not even a voice. The sound crawled into the hallway like the hiss of wind in a cavern, shaping itself into words I could barely understand. You came back. The prince took another step forward. I broke. With a raw scream, I bolted toward the stairs, nearly slipping as my sock caught the edge of a board. The flashlight rolled behind me, its beams swinging wildly across the walls, throwing warped shadows of the prints as they followed. I didn't look back. I just ran. Down the stairs. Across the foyer. My hand fumbled for the front door handle. Cold, slick with sweat, and wrenched it open. But outside, the world wasn't right. The yard was there. The trees. The long dirt drive. But everything had gone pale, drained of color. The grass, the sky, even my car parked at the edge of the property, muted like an old photograph. The air felt thick, heavy, and the faint smell of rust followed me out like a shadow. I staggered backward, gasping. The door behind me slammed shut. I spun around, heart in my throat. The windows of the house stared back at me like dark eyes. Something shifted in one of them, a flicker of movement, pale and thin, sliding past the glass. My first instinct was to run to the car, but when I tried to move, my legs felt heavy, like I was walking through water. The driveway stretched impossibly long, farther than it had been before. The trees swayed without wind, their branches bending toward me as if reaching. I stumbled off the porch and forced myself forward, step by dragging step. The car looked so close and yet so far, as though the distance stretched with every stride. Behind me, the front door creaked open again. I didn't want to look, but I did. It was standing in the doorway now, not blurred anymore. A figure, impossibly tall and thin, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Its face was still pale, but the features were forming now. A mouth stretched wide, lips torn and cracked, teeth like shards of glass. It didn't walk toward me. It just raised one long hand and beckoned. And somehow, through the distorted air, I heard it speak again. Come back. My legs gave out. I fell to my knees in the dead grass, my palms sinking into the cold soil. The ground smelled like iron. I tried to crawl, but the weight of the air pressed down harder, every breath a struggle. Then a sound cut through the heaviness. A bell, faint at first, then louder, ringing from somewhere behind the house. A deep, resonant tone, like an old church bell tolling. With each chime, the color in the world flickered faintly back into place. The grass greener, the sky less gray. The thing in the doorway hissed. Its mouth moved, but no sound came out. The bell rang again. And in that moment, I felt something loosen around me. The weight lifted just slightly. I pushed myself up, legs trembling, and ran. This time the car didn't seem so far. I reached it, fumbling for the keys in my pocket. They slipped through my shaking fingers once, twice, before I managed to jam one into the lock and wrench the door open. I tumbled inside and slammed the door shut. The bell rang again. The figure was still at the doorway, but it no longer beckoned. It stood rigid, mouth gaping wider and wider until its jaw cracked like breaking wood. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared to life. As I floored the accelerator, the world around me shifted violently. The color bled back in full, like ink spreading across paper. The driveway snapped back to its normal length, the trees straightened, and the air cleared. When I looked in the rearview mirror, the house stood still and silent, just an old, sagging structure at the edge of town. No pale figure in the doorway, no footprints. But the bell kept ringing. I didn't stop driving until I reached the main road. I pulled over at a gas station, shaking so hard I could barely get out of the car. Inside, under the fluorescent lights, the world felt almost normal again. But the smell of rust clung faintly to my clothes. I bought another coffee just to have something to do with my hands. The cashier, a bored teenager with earphones in, glanced at me once and frowned. You okay? I nodded too fast. Yeah, just long night. When I went to pay, he froze. His eyes flicked down at my wrist. You're bleeding, he said. I looked. There, across the inside of my arm, were faint red scratches. Not deep enough to draw much blood, but long and jagged, like fingernail marks. I had no memory of getting them. I left the gas station without another word. Sat in the car for a long time, staring at the scratches. The bell had stopped ringing. But when I glanced up at the mirror again, for a split second, I saw something in the back seat. Not a shape, not a person, just the faint shimmer of distorted air, like heat waves. I whipped around. Nothing there. I drove to a cheap motel outside of town and checked in under a false name. I didn't even bring my bags in from the car. I just locked the door, sat on the bed, and stared at my arm until sleep finally dragged me under. When I woke the next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains. The scratches on my arm had darkened to a deep red. But worse, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A notification from the real estate site. My house had been relisted overnight. The description had changed again. It now said, property occupied. Do not enter attic. Beneath that, a new photo had appeared. Not of the house. Of me, standing in the attic. I stared at my phone until the screen dimmed and went black, my reflection staring back at me in the glass. The photo was unmistakable. Me, in the attic, flashlight in one hand, mouth open like I'd been caught mid-breath. But I hadn't taken it. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs. I flicked the phone back on and zoomed in. The photo quality was grainy but clear enough to make out the details. The broken chairs, the cracked mirror, the panel door at the far wall. My own face pale with fear. And behind me, just visible in the darkness, those same blurred features. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. I should have called the police. I should have left the state. But the longer I sat there, the more a strange compulsion grew inside me, cold and coiling. It wasn't curiosity. It was something heavier, like a hook pulling me back toward the house. Every rational thought screamed to run, but beneath it all, a voice whispered, "You came back once. You'll come back again." By noon, I was already on the road. I didn't remember deciding to go. I just found myself driving, hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles went white. The sky above was gray, heavy with clouds, and the trees lining the road seemed darker than usual, their branches leaning closer as I passed. When I reached the property, the house looked unchanged. Sagging roof, boarded windows, weeds clawing at the porch steps. But the door was ajar, swinging faintly on its hinges as though it had been waiting. The smell hit me the moment I stepped out of the car. Rust, mold, and something else now, sweet, cloying, like old perfume. The kind my grandmother used to wear. The sound of my shoes crunching on gravel felt too loud, like the house might hear me. Inside, the air was dim and thick, dust drifting lazily in the weak light filtering through the windows. The front door closed behind me without a sound. I didn't bother searching the other rooms. I already knew where I was going. The hallway. The attic hatch. The cord hung perfectly still this time. The smell of rust and perfume bled from the opening above, faint but steady. My hands moved on their own. Pull the cord. Ladder falls. Dust rises. My flashlight beam cuts the darkness like a blade. As I climbed, my mind whispered, "This is where it started. This is where it ends." The attic looked the same, but the air was different, thicker, darker, as though night had pooled here even in daylight. The footprints were back, clear in the dust, leading once again to the panel door. But now the door stood open. A narrow, black slit in the wall. I aimed the flashlight at it. The beam swallowed almost instantly by the darkness beyond. The smell was stronger now. Rust, perfume, damp earth. My stomach rolled. I crouched by the opening. My fingers hovered over the edge. The wood was splintered, clawed, the paint long since stripped. Inside, only darkness. Something moved within. A faint rustling, like fabric brushing against stone. Then a voice, not whispered, but soft, human. "Female, you shouldn't have come back." My heart stopped. "Who are you?" I croaked, the words barely leaving my throat. Silence. Then, we waited. I swallowed hard. Waited for what? For you. The attic felt smaller suddenly, the beams bending inward. My flashlight flickered once, twice, and steadied. The darkness behind the panel door seemed to shift, a slow swirl like ink in water. I reached out before I could stop myself. My fingers brushed the edge of the opening. Cold. Wet. The smell grew stronger, dizzying. Then I saw it. A pale hand reaching out from the blackness, fingers long and thin, nails jagged. It didn't grab me. It just rested there, palm up, as though waiting for me to take it. The voice came again, softer now. "We can go home." My body trembled. Some part of me, the rational, screaming part, knew this was wrong, knew this wasn't a person. But another part felt drawn, like I'd been waiting for this hand my whole life. I inched closer. The air grew colder, the attic fading at the edges of my vision. In the cracked mirror leaning against the wall, my reflection shifted slightly. Not me crouched at the opening, but me kneeling, both hands already inside the darkness. The voice changed. No longer female. Lower now. Almost like mine. "Come back." My fingers brushed the pale hand. It grabbed me. Not hard, not violently, but with a firmness that sent a shock of cold up my arm, like ice sliding through my veins. The attic spun around me, the beams blurring, the floor tilting like a sinking ship. I tried to pull back, but my arm wouldn't move. The hand was stronger than it looked. The darkness inside the panel door swelled, pushing outward like a living thing. In the mirror, my reflection's face wasn't mine anymore. It was pale and blurred, features sliding like wax. Its mouth moved, but no sound came out. The voice whispered, right in my ear now, though no one was near me. We never left. Then the floor beneath me cracked. The attic dropped away like a trapdoor opening, darkness swallowing everything. The last thing I saw before it took me was the mirror, shattering, pieces spinning in slow motion, each shard reflecting my face stretched thin and pale. And then, silence. No attic. No house. Just black. The cold was absolute, deeper than anything I'd felt. I couldn't tell if I was standing, falling, or floating. The smell of rust was gone now, replaced by damp earth, like a basement that had been sealed for decades. Somewhere in the dark, faint voices murmured, too far away to make out words. They rose and fell like the tide, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. Then, slowly, the darkness shifted. Shapes emerged, walls, wood beams, a low ceiling. I was in a room. Small, cramped, no bigger than a closet. The floor under me was dirt, damp and cold. The walls were old planks, rotting. A single object lay at my feet. An old, cracked photograph. It was the house, but newer, decades ago. Fresh paint, clean windows, flowers in the yard. And on the porch, 3 people. A man, a woman, and a child. The woman's face was blurred. The child's, too. But the man was me. The photograph trembled in my hands, the edges soft with age, the image faded like a half-remembered dream. But the man on the porch was undeniably me. Same eyes, same sharp jawline, same faint scar above the eyebrow I'd gotten in high school. My breath came in short, sharp bursts. I turned the photo over. On the back, scrawled in neat, looping handwriting, were the words, "Welcome home, Elias." My stomach lurched. Nobody called me that name. Nobody knew it. It had been my birth name, changed on the adoption papers when I was 4. A name buried under decades of living as someone else. The room around me seemed to press closer, the wooden planks groaning under invisible weight. The air had grown warm and wet, like the inside of a lung. Shadows crawled along the walls without light to cast them. The voices in the dark swelled louder. A chorus now. Words began to form, overlapping, fragments of whispers I could just barely catch. He came back. He left us here. He promised. My pulse hammered in my throat. I staggered backward, my fingers still clutching the photograph. My back hit the wall. It was soft, spongy, like it wasn't wood at all but flesh stretched taut. The pale hand reached out of the darkness again. This time there was no hesitation. It grabbed my shoulder, long fingers curling around my collarbone, the nails biting just enough to draw blood. "Elias," it breathed. This voice was clearer now, female, low, intimate. A memory wrapped in sound. "Do you remember?" "No," I gasped. "I don't." But even as I said it, something surfaced in my mind. Not a memory exactly, but a sensation, warm summer air, the smell of sawdust and flowers, a child's laugh echoing through these same walls when they were new. My hands building something. A ladder. A hatch. A promise whispered in a dark corner. "We'll always be together, Elias. No matter what." My knees buckled. The photograph slipped from my fingers and landed face up in the dirt. In its place, another image bloomed behind my eyes. The attic, decades ago. The panel door wide open. A woman with pale hands reaching out. A child at her side. And me, walking away. I shook my head hard, trying to fling the image out. "That's not me," I whispered. "That's not me." But the voices rose into a low hum, vibrating through the floor, the walls, my bones. It is. You left us." The pale hand tightened on my shoulder, pulling me closer to the darkness. The voice bent low, its breath cold against my ear. "We waited. We built this place for you." I clawed at the dirt floor, but it gave like wet clay, my fingers sinking in. My flashlight was gone. My phone was gone. The only light came from the faint glow leaking out of the photograph, still lying in the dirt. I lunged for it. but the hand yanked me back. I twisted, kicking, my heel connecting with something solid. The room rippled like a reflection in disturbed water. And suddenly I was back in the attic, kneeling by the open panel door, the smell of rust and perfume thick in my nose. The cracked mirror leaning against the wall, reflecting me, but not me. The figure in the reflection was smiling now. Its features were almost whole. It looked like the man in the photograph. It looked like Elias. Behind it, in the reflection, the pale woman and the child stood waiting, their faces still blurred but their outlines solid. They each raised a hand, beckoning. I spun around. The attic was empty. Just me, the panel door, the dust. But the reflection didn't change. Elias, the chorus whispered. Come home. The attic hatch slammed shut behind me with a sound like thunder. Darkness swallowed everything but the mirror and the black slit of the panel door. The reflection began to move, stepping forward. The figure of Elias reached out toward the glass, pressing his palm flat against it. The woman and child mirrored him. On my side, the mirror's surface bulged outward, like something pressing from within. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on a beam. My heart hammered so loud it drowned out the whispers. Stop, I croaked. I'm not him. I don't belong here. The reflection tilted its head. The smile widened. Its mouth moved, and for the first time I heard my own voice coming from it. You never left. The panel door creaked open wider, the darkness spilling out like smoke, curling around my ankles. It was cold, so cold it burned. In the mirror, Elias stepped through the doorway and vanished into the black. The woman and child followed. Only their pale hands lingered at the edge of the glass, reaching. The attic floor trembled. The beams overhead groaned. Dust poured from the ceiling like ash. I tried to run, but the darkness was already climbing me, heavy as wet sand. My legs sank first, then my torso. I clawed at the floorboards, splinters digging into my palms, but it only dragged me faster. At the last second, I grabbed the edge of the mirror. The glass was warm, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. I looked into it and saw no reflection at all. Just the attic, empty. A voice, not many this time, but one, low and soft, whispered from everywhere at once. Welcome home. The darkness swallowed me whole. I woke up in my bed. Morning sunlight streamed through the window. Birds chirped faintly outside. The smell of rust was gone. The house was still, quiet, almost normal. For a moment, I thought it had been a nightmare. But when I sat up, the sheets were coated in a fine layer of dust. My palms were splintered. And on the nightstand, where my phone had been, lay the photograph. This time the image had changed. No porch, no woman, no child, just the house. Empty. Except in the top window, the attic, I could see a pale face staring out. My own. I dropped the photo and stumbled to the mirror over the dresser. My reflection stared back, pale and blurred at the edges. It smiled. Then it whispered my name. And this time, the voice didn't come from behind the glass. It came from me. The photograph trembled in my hands. The edges were soft with age. The image faded like a memory that didn't want to be remembered. But the man on the porch was me. Same eyes, same scar above the eyebrow, same shape of the mouth. I turned the photo over. On the back, written in looping script, were the words, Welcome home, Elias. My chest tightened. That name, Elias, was mine, but not the one I used. It was my birth name, changed on adoption papers decades ago. A name I hadn't heard since I was a child. The air in the room pressed heavier, damp and warm, like the walls themselves were breathing. Shadows slid along the planks, moving against the grain of light. And beneath it all, the voices rose again, no longer faint but layered, 100 whispers overlapping. You left us. You promised. You came back. I stumbled back, my spine hitting the wall. It wasn't solid wood anymore. It yielded slightly, spongy, as if I were pressing into something alive. From the black panel door, the pale hand reached again. Its fingers curled over my shoulder with a grip colder than ice, nails digging into my skin. Blood-welled, hot, and sharp. Elias, the voice breathed in my ear. This time it was clearer. Female, tender, almost loving. Do you remember? I shook my head violently. No, I don't. But fragments leaked through anyway. A summer long ago. Flowers in the yard. A woman's laugh. A child's footsteps racing up a ladder I had built with my own hands. My voice whispering, We'll always be together. Always. And then, darkness. A door shut. Silence. I choked out, that wasn't me. The voices rose louder, vibrating in the floor and beams. It was. It is. You left us. The hand on my shoulder pulled me closer. I fell to my knees as the photograph slipped from my fingers, landing face up in the dirt. Its glow pulsed faintly, the image shifting. Not a family on the porch now. Just the house. The attic window wide open, black. And in it, a pale face. Mine. I looked up. The cracked mirror against the wall showed me kneeling, but it wasn't me. The figure in the glass was Elias, the man from the photo. He smiled, pale lips parting. Behind him, a blurred woman and child raised their hands in unison, beckoning. The attic hatch slammed shut above with a crash like thunder. The room shuddered. Darkness spilled from the paneled door, flooding across the floor like smoke, wrapping around my ankles, climbing higher. I screamed, clawing at the floorboards as the cold weight pulled me down. The mirror bulged outward, glass warping like water about to burst. In the reflection, Elias stepped through the paneled door, his hand extended. The woman and child followed, their outlines clearer now, faces still smudged, but smiles wide. The voices became one. Not angry, not mournful, just final. Welcome home. The darkness swallowed me. I woke in my bed. Morning sunlight streamed through the window. The air smelled clean. The house was quiet. For a fleeting moment, I believed it had been a nightmare. But when I sat up, my sheets were coated in dust. My palms were full of splinters. And on the nightstand where my phone should have been lay the photograph. It had changed again. No family. No porch. Just the house. And in the top window, the attic, a pale figure stared out. My own face. I turned slowly toward the mirror across the room. My reflection stood there, but not quite right. The edges of my face blurred, pale, shifting like wax. It smiled. And then, softly, it whispered my name. Not Elias. My name now. And I realized the voice wasn't coming from behind the glass. It was coming from me.